If you're listening to this, remember one thing. Nothing in the sky changes color that fast unless something is terribly wrong. On the night when 3I Atlas turned gold, really turned gold, not a poetic gold, but a luminous metallic radiation that shouldn't exist in any known chemical spectrum, every researcher on Earth felt it in their stomach, even those who pretended not to. And if you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll never again look at a bright object in the night sky and think it's just a comet. You'll understand why December 19th is now circled in red ink across every space agency calendar, why some of us haven't slept in days, and why certain classified briefings begin with the phrase, "We may already be too late." It began quietly, too quietly. 3 months earlier, 3I Atlas was just the third confirmed interstellar object in human history, a faint streak of light caught by the Atlas survey in Hawaii. Nothing unusual at first. Dim, cold, non-reactive, moving on a trajectory that said, "Passing visitor, don't worry." But then, in late October, something began to shift. The object brightened slightly, then dimmed. Perfectly normal. Outgassing maybe, rotation, surface shedding, all textbook. Except the telescope logs show the brightening wasn't random. It pulsed. Exactly 11.4 seconds apart. 11.4, 11.4, 11.4. No comet pulses with metronomic precision, and yet the early teams missed it because the object was still too faint and too far. By early November, we already felt unease, though no one said it out loud. But the night everything changed, the night of the first major color shift, I was at Cerro Tololo Observatory in Chile, reviewing the latest telemetry. The object had just crossed the threshold where amateur astronomers could see it with high-end backyard equipment. We expected a slight rise in brightness as 3I Atlas approached the inner solar system. Nothing more. Then, the monitors went white. Not static, white. Blinding white, like the sensors were oversaturated by something they couldn't classify. At first, we thought it was equipment failure, but the color data kept streaming in. Wavelengths we had no business detecting from a cosmic ice ball. The spectrum wasn't cometary. It wasn't even stellar. It was engineered. That's when the alarms triggered, and that's when we saw the gold. A deep, molten aurum flare rippled across the object, blooming outward like a controlled detonation, except there was no debris, no shock wave, no mass loss. Just a transformation, a phase shift. The object amplified, more than 4 times brighter in less than 12 seconds. If you want a comparison, imagine a dying candle that suddenly turns into a stadium floodlight. No natural comet does that. No natural anything does. The first message from NASA that night was short, clinical, and terrifying in its simplicity. We are observing atypical photometric escalation. Maintain continuous recording. Do not assume stability. We watched the light spread across the nucleus. Smooth, even, purposeful. Purposeful is the word no one dared to use, but everyone felt, because comets flicker, stars pulsate, asteroids reflect. But 3I Atlas transitioned, like it was entering a new mode, a new state. And as the gold deepened, as the glow stabilized into a metallic sheen that tracked its rotation with unnatural symmetry, the room fell silent. I remember the hum of the air conditioners, the soft clicking of the thermal stabilizers, the faint tremor in the floor from the generators, but nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. We didn't have vocabulary for what we were seeing. At 21:14 UTC, the second anomaly began. A shift, softer than the first but more disturbing. A faint halo, violet at first, then drifting into a spectrum between ultraviolet and something our instruments weren't designed to interpret, spread around the nucleus, like a dim corona. It didn't scatter like dust. It held its shape, clinging to the object's contour as if bound by a magnetic or gravitational field, except the readings showed neither. That's when the first unambiguous warning appeared in the orbital simulations. A deviation. Small, subtle, but real. The object was drifting off its predicted path, not by kilometers, but by micrometers per second squared, enough to matter, enough to accumulate, enough to tell us something was pushing it, something internal, something deliberate. The gold glow intensified a second time, but this time the flare was quieter, more controlled, not a burst, but a tightening, as if the object was focusing, compressing, gathering itself. And then the light contracted sharply, collapsing inward and leaving the object slightly dimmer than before, but measurably hotter. Yes, hotter. Interstellar objects do not heat themselves. They heat when they approach the sun or after rotation-induced outgassing. But 3I Atlas heated after dimming, like a machine, charging a battery. The official report called it non-gravitational behavior inconsistent with natural outgassing. Unofficially, people were shaking, even the veterans, even those who'd lived through Oumuamua's unexplained acceleration and Borisov's fragmentation. This was different, worse, because this time we weren't seeing random oddities. We were seeing stages, phases, as if 3I Atlas was following some internal blueprint. The gold, the ultraviolet corona, the heating, the drift trajectory. None of it looked spontaneous. It looked sequential, coordinated. Like someone, or something, had programmed it long before it ever entered our solar system. The next hours were chaos. Phone calls, cross-agency link-ups, encrypted briefings. But the public didn't know any of that. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. The sky looked the same as always. Until the videos emerged. Amateur astronomers in Brazil, Australia, and South Africa posted footage almost simultaneously, phone clips of their telescopes showing the object flickering gold in real time. The comments flooded in. People thought it was fake, CGI, a hoax, something for likes and shares, until the next wave of videos arrived. And the next. And then the live streams. Real-time broadcasts watched by hundreds of thousands showed the gold intensifying again, forming a bright, sharp highlight along one edge of the object, like a crescent, like a sunrise. Except the light wasn't coming from the sun. Something inside 3I Atlas was producing it. And then right at the peak of the broadcast frenzy, something happened that every agency later tried to downplay. The object moved. Not drifted, not wobbled, moved. A tiny, sudden lateral displacement recorded identically on feeds from 3 continents. A shift that, when calculated, corresponded to an instantaneous acceleration impossible for a passive body. It was small, but it was real. The moment it happened, every chat exploded, every scientist watching jolted upright, and every control room in the world went still. If the gold phase was the first warning, this was the second. 3I Atlas was no longer behaving like something carried by momentum and gravity. It acted like something responding. The color faded after the displacement. Not entirely, but traces of the gold remained. But the brilliance softened, drained, stabilized into a quiet ember glow. Some people took that as relief. We didn't. Because comets don't flare and fade in discrete steps like heartbeat signatures. Machines do. At 23:02 UTC, the object shifted color again, but this time the change was subtle, blue-white streaks rippling beneath the gold, weaving like veins. The temperature readings increased, the spins slowed by 0.02%, and the drift accelerated. Not enough to cause panic, not yet, but enough that, for the first time, our predictive confidence dropped below 99%. And that's when the chat channels between agencies became grave. Because 3I Atlas was supposed to pass at a safe distance, millions of kilometers away, but with every new drift, the margin shrank. A little at first, meters, tens of meters. Then the next hour, hundreds, then thousands. Any normal comet would drift because of jets, gas vents pushing it unpredictably. But 3I Atlas had no visible jets, no dust, no tail, nothing to generate thrust. And yet, it moved, which left only one possible explanation: internal forces. Something inside it was generating acceleration. Even now, saying that out loud feels wrong, like inviting insanity. Internal forces. In a rock, an ice ball, a visitor from another star. But that's what the data said, and the data never lies. The gold glow returned again, briefly, sharply, before collapsing inward like the shutter of a camera lens. The timing was consistent with the earlier pulses. 11.4, 11.4, 11. A countdown to what? We didn't know. Maybe activation, maybe destabilization, maybe something we didn't even have language for yet. But once I noticed it, once I said it aloud in the control room, the others stopped arguing about instrument errors and calibration drift. They looked at me with the kind of expression people wear when they realize the thing they were hoping was nonsense might actually be true. Because the pulses weren't random, they were accelerating. Slightly, barely, but undeniably. 11.4 seconds, then 11.38, then 11.36, then 11.35. Anyone else might have dismissed it as noise, but astrophysicists live and die by decimals. A tenth of a second is a continent shifting. A hundredth is a planet breathing. And this was something waking up. The gold receded more slowly this time, fading unevenly, leaving streaks like molten metal cooling on a forge. For a moment, the object went dark, darker than the surrounding sky, as if it was absorbing more light than it reflected. That should have been impossible. Space is black, but 3I/Atlas became an absence, a shape that looked carved out of the stars behind it. Then, without warning, it flashed a different color entirely. Deep green, like ionized copper under immense stress. The flare lasted less than half a second, but it lit the sky in the telescopes like an atmospheric aurora. And after the green came something even worse: turbulence. Not in the object, but in the data. Sensors flickered, magnetometers spiked. A local field distortion registered for 6 seconds, dropping and rising in a pattern that resembled interference. But interference from what? It wasn't solar, wasn't geomagnetic, wasn't cosmic microwave noise. It was something localized entirely around the object, as if its physical presence was now bending more than light, maybe bending space itself. We tried to stay rational, to cling to physics, but the data was shredding our confidence minute by minute. At 0111 UTC, the drift deviated sharply, and for the first time in all our simulations, the projected closest approach distance updated automatically. It shrank by tens of thousands of kilometers. Still safe, still technically harmless, but the trend line told another story. If this deviation repeated even twice, we were no longer talking about a peaceful interstellar passerby. We were talking about something that could come far closer than anticipated, something that might skim Earth's gravitational influence, something that might interact. Suddenly, the encrypted line in the back corner of the control room buzzed, the red one, the one reserved for joint agency emergencies. The director picked it up, listened, didn't speak, just nodded slowly. When he hung up, he didn't turn back to us immediately. He looked out the large observation window instead, at the unblinking blackness of the sky. Then he inhaled once, sharp and controlled, and said, "We have confirmation from the Deep Space Network. The drift is not environmental. The acceleration vector is originating from within the object. You are to continue all monitoring, but refrain from public release until we understand the mechanics." Someone muttered, "Mechanics? Someone else whispered, "Internal thrust?" The director didn't answer, and none of us pressed him because we were all thinking the same thing. Internal structure implies design. Design implies intent. The word intent in a room full of scientists feels like blasphemy, but it hung there, heavy, unavoidable. And then, just when panic threatened to overtake reason, the object stabilized again. The glow softened, the pulses slowed, the drift plateaued. For almost 20 minutes, 3I/Atlas behaved like something benign, even predictable. A comet again, a visitor again, something we could model again. Relief washed over the room in a wave so visible it felt like someone dimmed the tension by hand. Shoulders relaxed, jaws unclenched. Someone joked weakly. Maybe it had indigestion. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because terror needs somewhere to go. But I kept watching the monitors, the spectral lines, the pulse timing, the temperature, the rotation curves, and something made my scalp tighten. The stabilization wasn't real. It was a plateau, a false calm, like a heartbeat slowing right before a spasm. And then the gold returned, not as a flare this time, slow, spreading from one point on the surface outward like a sunrise bleeding across an alien horizon, and the pulses resumed. Faster. 11.3, 11.28, 11.26. Every shift, however tiny, felt like another nail tightening on some unknown mechanism. The green flickered again, this time longer, and the temperature rose, not gradually, stepped, discrete jumps like a machine turning on new subsystems one at a time. Then the object rotated, or rather something on its surface rotated. A pattern emerged. Lines, not random cracks, not ice fractures, lines, sharp, angular, structured, illuminated by the internal glow. Someone in the room gasped like they'd been punched. Someone else cursed quietly under their breath. I felt my throat go dry. Because no comet has geometry, no comet shows symmetry, no comet has markings, and yet 3I/Atlas showed us exactly that, lines that formed a shape resembling a hexagonal arc around one hemisphere. It could have been natural in some absurdly improbable scenario, but paired with the pulses, the thermal jumps, the drift, and the sequences, it was impossible to call it a coincidence. The director spoke again, but softer this time, as if someone or something might hear. Record everything. No assumptions, no theories, only data. So we did. We recorded. But the data wasn't comforting. It was escalating. At 0206 UTC, the object dimmed again, absorbing more light than before. The halo vanished. The geometry darkened. For almost a minute it looked inert, like the earlier phases were illusions. But then the infrared sensors spiked so violently that two of them failed. The object heated again, this time far beyond what any natural reaction could achieve in deep space. And then, impossibly, the spin stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The angular momentum simply vanished. The object hung in space with the unnatural stillness of something ignoring inertia. I remember whispering, "That's not possible," before I even realized I'd said it out loud. Because stopping rotation requires torque, enormous torque. There is no mechanism for that in an inert body. None. And yet it happened. That's when the atmosphere in the room changed entirely. Fear isn't the right word. Fear is simple. This was reverence, dread. The awareness that something was unfolding before us that didn't care about human expectation or comprehension. Then the glow shifted again, a new color this time. Not gold, not green. Something closer to violet, but richer, like the sky before a storm amplified by an alien sun.
And with the violet came something we'd never seen from any object in space: modulation. The light was modulated, intensity rising and falling in patterns that weren't random, weren't natural, weren't anything except deliberate. Someone whispered, "It's communicating." Someone else snapped, "With what?" And that was the question nobody dared to answer, because deep in our minds we all felt the same sickening possibility. Maybe it wasn't communicating at all. Maybe it was calibrating. And then the worst moment of the night arrived.
For most people on Earth, the night after the gold flare looked quiet, ordinary, even peaceful. The sky was clear above most of the major observatories, and the world slept unaware that an object from another star had just performed a maneuver no natural body should be capable of. But we were awake, all of us. Every control room, every deep space antenna, every back-channel chat between agencies that normally couldn't agree on what day of the week it was. There was no room for disbelief anymore. 3-Eye Atlas had shown us something real. Movement. Intentional or not, it had changed its trajectory with a precision no comet should possess. And when the object went dark, so dark our instruments registered it as a gravitational ghost rather than a body of rock and ice, the fear set in permanently. The next morning, if you can call a few hours without conscious thought morning, the Deep Space Network released a synchronized log update. The drift was not only real, it was accelerating. Still small, still subtle, still easy to hide from the public, but undeniable. The difficulty now wasn't convincing anyone that something strange was happening. It was convincing them that we still had time. I remember staring at the new trajectory overlay, the glowing blue arc that represented the original expected path bowing inward, bending toward the delicate red curve that indicated the updated model. You could almost pretend they still lined up if you blurred your eyes, but when you zoomed in, when you looked at the numbers, there was a deviation large enough that even the most optimistic projections admitted one thing: the object was no longer just passing through, it was approaching. Not guaranteed to hit, not even likely to enter the atmosphere, but approaching. And every new micro-acceleration made that approach more intimate, more deliberate. We needed a closer look. That meant radar. That meant coordinating antennas across continents, using planetary radar arrays usually reserved for asteroids on potentially hazardous trajectories. Within 2 hours, our request was approved. Within 4, the first radar ping was sent. And for 29 minutes, nothing happened. Radar time isn't like normal waiting. Radar time is a question pointed into the void, and every second the void doesn't answer is a second you become more certain the universe has just changed its rules. Then, exactly 29 minutes and 11 seconds later, the echo returned. Weak, distorted, but real. And wrong. Because the cross-section wasn't spherical. It wasn't elongated, it wasn't even irregular like a rock. It was patterned, angular, structured. The surface reflected the radar in discrete planes like facets, like panels, like something built. The junior operator at the console whispered, "This looks like a ship." The director snapped at him instantly, "You will not use that word." But the silence in the room after he said it confirmed the truth we were all trying not to say out loud. The radar cross-section changed every pulse, as if surfaces were moving, reconfiguring, adapting. The object wasn't tumbling uncontrollably like a comet. It was adjusting itself. And with each new return, the pattern grew sharper, more defined, like it was settling into its final shape. But then came the anomaly that truly broke the room's composure. The Doppler data showed a microburst of acceleration, not enough to be dangerous on its own, but enough to prove that internal forces were active again. Enough to show that the earlier behavior wasn't a glitch, it was a sequence. The next pulse confirmed it, the one after that reinforced it. And then, at the 27th radar cycle, 3I Atlas did something so unsettling it took the breath out of every person within earshot. It reflected the radar signal differently, not randomly, not in noise, in a pattern. A modulated, repeating pattern. Radar returns cannot behave like that. They don't encode, they don't respond, they don't send anything back except what you send to them, unless the surface doing the reflecting is actively altering itself to create modulation. The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like the air is listening. I leaned toward the screen, reading every new spike in the return waveform, mapping each distortion in real time. It didn't form language, it didn't form numbers, it didn't form anything humans could immediately decode, but it was deliberate, repeating, a loop. The director told everyone not to speak of it, not to theorize, not to jump to conclusions, but the fear in his eyes said everything he couldn't bring himself to admit. The object wasn't just reacting, it was acknowledging. Hours later, the first amateur astronomers posted new footage. The gold phase hadn't returned, but something else had. A deepening blue-white shimmer across one hemisphere, almost like a bruise glowing under the surface. It pulsed in intervals matching the radar modulation, exactly matching. 11.22 seconds, 11.21, 11.2. The countdown had resumed. The second major color phase, the one predicted by the pattern analysis from the night before. The moment we saw the new shimmer, everyone in the room knew this wasn't random evolution, it was progression. The second stage, the strengthening phase. The deep blue glow spread slowly at first, like ink bleeding through paper, then accelerated, racing across the surface until half the object glowed with a spectral light that telescopes automatically overexposed. It wasn't bright in the usual sense, not like the gold flare, but it was intense, condensed, pure. A frequency we almost never see in nature except in highly ionized plasmas under extreme conditions. Whatever was happening inside 3I Atlas, it was building, charging, advancing. That was the moment I heard the whisper behind me, one of the senior astrophysicists muttering under his breath, forgetting he wasn't alone. It's becoming something. The new radar passes confirmed it. The shape was stabilizing, the drift increased again. Tiny, subtle, but consistent. If it accelerated at even half this rate over the next month, the object would pass far closer to Earth than originally calculated. Too close for comfort. Close enough for something catastrophic if the behavior continued to escalate. And yet the worst part, the part none of us wanted to say out loud, was this. The color changes were correlated with increasing internal energy. Every time it shifted, it grew stronger. Every time it pulsed, the sequence shortened. Every time we measured the drift, it increased. This wasn't a degenerative process, it was developmental, evolutionary. It wasn't dying, it was maturing. At 0412 UTC, the Deep Space Network sent another update. The radar modulation had changed, not in randomness, into structure, into a three-tiered repeating waveform resembling a harmonic. Harmonics come from instruments, from engines, from systems built to do something at the right time. Someone whispered, "Is it scanning us?" Someone else said nothing, but clutched the desk so hard the wood creaked. Then a message flashed on the main screen. Revision. Estimated close approach distance adjusted. The number beside it was tens of thousands of kilometers lower. No one said a word. No one breathed.
because the universe had just tipped a little further, and every new color shift, every new modulation, every new acceleration brought one truth closer. 3i Atlas wasn't just approaching Earth, it was preparing for something when it arrived. The final radar ping of the night arrived at 0429, faint and distorted, the pattern almost musical in its repetition. And then the signal stopped. Nothing. A void. A silence more terrifying than any modulation, because when instruments stop hearing something, it means one of two things. Either the object has moved out of line, or it has just become invisible to detection. The director stared at the blank screen for a long time before whispering the sentence that would follow us the rest of this investigation. Phase 2 is complete. And all I could think, as the monitors glowed in their cold fluorescent light, was that the colors were not random at all. They were stages, transformations, like a creature shedding skins as it grows. And the next phase, the one predicted by the sequence, the one approaching faster than any of us wanted to admit, would begin much closer to Earth on December 19th, the day 3i Atlas would reveal what it was becoming.
By the time the world finally learned that something was wrong with 3i-ATL, we were already 2 phases in, already watching the countdown accelerate like a heartbeat trying to escape a dying body. But the public didn't know that. They only saw the headlines. Interstellar object shows unexpected brightening. Newcomer from deep space shifts color. Scientists perplexed. No danger to Earth, agencies say. That last one hurt the most, because even then, especially then, we knew that was becoming less true every hour. But what were we supposed to say? The visitor from another star just performed maneuvers that violate Newtonian mechanics? Its surface is turning into structured geometry? The color pulses might be part of a countdown? No one would have believed us, and if they had, panic would have spread faster than the news. So instead, we told ourselves we needed more data. We needed more certainty. We needed proof that what we were witnessing wasn't just an anomaly, but a pattern, something undeniable. And that proof came sooner than any of us wanted. It began with a woman named Dr. Adriana Celestino, a plasma physicist working at the European Southern Observatory. She was the first person to notice what the radar team had missed. The modulation in the reflected signal wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. Each repetition introduced a tiny alteration, a deviation so small it couldn't be noticed without stacking the waveforms on top of each other. But when she did, the truth materialized like a scream between the lines of a whisper. The object wasn't just reflecting our radar pulses, it was rewriting them, modifying them, learning from them, adjusting, responding. I still remember the moment she showed us the time-stacked signal. The screen flickered with hundreds of overlapping pulses, each one slightly different from the last. Some grew sharper, some dulled, some shifted phase. The changes weren't random, they were directional, purposeful. It was like watching a lock being picked by invisible hands. "It's adapting," she said, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "It's interacting with the radar in a way that suggests it's refining something internally." "Refining what?" someone asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because right then a new message flashed on the main console. Updated trajectory, confidence decreased to 87%. Another drift, another micro-acceleration, another step closer. When the room finally emptied, when the screens dimmed and the echoes of frantic conversations died in the concrete walls of the observatory, I found myself alone with the data. And that's when I noticed something no one else had caught yet.
The color sequences, gold, blue-white, violet, they weren't random shifts in spectral output. They were perfectly timed. The intervals between them followed a pattern identical to the harmonic distortions in the radar responses, a pattern that matched something else entirely. The activation sequence found in the telemetry records of 3II-ATL, the previous interstellar object discovered earlier that same year. A sequence we all assumed came from the object fragmenting under natural stress, not from something awakening. When I pulled those old data logs and compared them side by side, the truth hit me like gravity disappearing beneath my feet. The color changes of 3I-ATL were following the exact same harmonic curve, except faster, more precise, more powerful. It was evolving faster than its predecessor, learning faster, strengthening faster, as if whatever happened to 3II-ATL months earlier was a test, a rehearsal, and 3I-ATL was the real event. I forwarded the comparison to the director. 10 minutes later, the security locks engaged around the control room. When he arrived, he didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply said, "You are not to speak of this to anyone, not until we understand what this means." But we already did. And the look in his eyes confirmed it. "You think they're connected," I whispered. He paused, then nodded. "I think this is Phase 3. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic data analysis, emergency communications, and classified briefings behind doors that locked from the outside. The world still slept beneath the illusion that this was just another pretty object in the sky. But up here, surrounded by screens that glowed like cold suns, we watched the object inch closer to its next transformation. And then, the nightmare moment arrived. Shortly before dawn, a new burst of amateur footage appeared online. Not from observatories or backyard telescopes, but from smartphone cameras pointed at the early morning sky. A faint flicker, a pulse, a shimmer of violet that looked almost like a star winking. But 3I-ATL wasn't supposed to be visible to the naked eye yet, not even close. And yet, there it was. Bright enough to pierce through the atmosphere, bright enough to be seen by people who didn't even know where to look. When the videos hit social media, we expected panic. But the comments were calm, dismissive even. Probably a satellite, lens flare, just a star. But we knew better, and we knew the truth would be impossible to hide soon. Because the third phase had begun. Sensors detected the shift before even the fastest telescopes did. A spike in ultraviolet and gamma emissions, rapid, structured, almost rhythmic. The object wasn't just glowing anymore. It was radiating, controlled, pulsed, directed. The violet deepened, spreading across the object in a way that didn't correspond to rotation or surface features, but seemed to originate from deep within, like something was pushing outward, stretching against the shell of whatever material encased it. For 4 minutes, the violet flared and retracted, until finally it stabilized into a steady, eerie glow. Every instrument we had pointed at it lit up with readings outside all natural models: thermal, magnetic, spectral, kinetic. The object was no longer behaving like a body in space. It was behaving like a system completing Stage 3. If Phase 1 was ignition, Adriana murmured, and Phase 2 was charge, I finished. But expansion of what? Energy? Structure? Function? The only certainty was that the violet glow marked another acceleration, another shift, another step toward whatever 3I-ATL was preparing to become on December 19th.
And as the final data from the violet flare streamed across the monitors, one number stood out like a blade pressed cold against the spine. Distance at closest approach. Revision, 427,000 kilometers. The Earth's atmosphere begins at around 100 kilometers. The Moon's orbit is about 384,000 kilometers. And 427,000 kilometers meant one thing. 3I-ATL would pass inside the lunar orbit, closer to Earth than the Moon. That was the moment no one could deny the truth anymore. Not even the director, not even the agencies, not even the people still clinging to the word comet as if it were a lifeline in a rising tide. 3I-ATL wasn't coming near Earth, it was coming to Earth, and everything it had done up to this point, every color, every pulse, every acceleration, was building toward whatever would happen when it arrived. The director closed the last classified folder on his desk, massaged his temples, and whispered, "We need to prepare for Phase 4. But all I could think about was the pattern, the harmonics, the curve matching the earlier interstellar visitor, the fact that the sequence was speeding up. Because Phase 4 wasn't supposed to happen yet. By all previous models, we shouldn't have seen anything more until mid-December. But the violet glow, this third phase, was already stabilizing. It was ahead of schedule. And if the phases were accelerating, maybe the timeline was too. Maybe December 19th wasn't the date of arrival. Maybe it was the deadline. Something shivered in my chest as that thought settled like dust inside a crypt. Because standing there in that cold room with the violet glow of an alien object pulsing through the monitors, I realized a terrifyingly simple thing. The countdown wasn't to the moment 3I-ATL reached Earth. The countdown was to the moment it finished becoming whatever it was meant to be. By the time Phase 3 stabilized, sleep had become a rumor. Every scientist on the project was running on cold coffee and adrenaline, staring into screens that glowed like portals into something older than our species, and every new reading made one fact more obvious. Whatever 3I ITAS was becoming, it was nearly ready. The violet glow had stopped fluctuating and settled into a steady resonance that our instruments described as persistent structural excitation. None of us knew what that meant, but we knew it wasn't natural. Natural objects cool. Natural objects disperse energy. Natural objects decay. This one was building towards something. And as November bled into December, the drift grew worse. At first, it was accelerations too tiny for the public to notice, but the updates kept shrinking the projected closest approach. 420,000 kilometers, 418,000, 415,000. The moon felt suddenly fragile, a bystander in a cosmic event it was never meant to witness. But the public still had no idea. They saw the object now, sometimes faintly visible before dawn, sometimes a shimmering dot overhead, but they didn't understand why the news anchors were suddenly talking about rare atmospheric scattering and harmless photometric anomalies. If only they knew the truth. The glow was strengthening, the pulses were quickening, the internal temperature was rising like a star forming under its own will. And then came December 5th, the night everything snapped into focus. I was in the observatory alone when the first readings arrived, new spectral lines, sharp and narrow, appearing at frequencies we had never seen from the object. These weren't chemical emissions. These were controlled outputs, frequency bands that aligned perfectly with high-energy resonance models used in particle accelerators. 3I ITAS wasn't just glowing anymore. It was generating something, a field, a halo, a distortion that bent photons in ways that made distant stars shimmer and warp behind it. By dawn, the distortion grew so strong that even amateur astronomers began posting time-lapse videos of stars wiggling behind the object. The videos went viral, and suddenly the world woke up. News anchors shifted from forced smiles to genuine fear. Government officials began stumbling over their press statements. People flooded forums with theories, prophecies, aliens, weapons, doom. For the first time since this began, the illusion of normalcy fractured, and 3I ITAS kept getting closer. The director called an emergency meeting, every agency on one encrypted line: NASA, ESA, JAXA, CNSA, even the organizations that hadn't spoken publicly about space since the Cold War. For 3 hours, they argued, debated, yelled, demanded answers from the universe that simply weren't there. And then, when the shouting faded, Adriana said the words that froze the entire call. The harmonics indicate this isn't a decay sequence. This is activation. The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your teeth. She continued, voice trembling but steady. There are 4 major harmonic peaks. We've seen 3. The final one aligns with December 19th. What happens then? Someone whispered. We don't know, Adriana said. But everything we've observed suggests 3I ITAS will complete whatever it's becoming on that date. More silence. Then a voice I didn't recognize asked the question everyone feared. Will it be hostile? Adriana didn't answer. No one did, because we didn't know. We still don't know. But we knew one thing. The object had begun to unfold. Not physically, at least not in visible ways, but the radar cross-sections showed new angles, new faces, new planes. Something beneath the surface was rearranging itself. The harmonics spiked again. The pulses shortened. 11.03 seconds, 11.0, 10.98. The countdown was accelerating. That evening the world saw something it never should have seen. Just after sunset, near the horizon above the Pacific, 3I ITAS flared so brightly that city lights dimmed. The glow cut through cloud cover like a blade. People from Chile to Japan flooded social media with videos showing the sky turning violet for 3 full seconds. And then, as the glow faded, the shape became visible to the naked eye. Not spherical, not comet-like, angular. A silhouette that looked like a dark polyhedron outlined against the fading light. A shape that didn't belong in nature. A shape that belonged in theories no one dared publish. I heard screaming outside the observatory, not panicked, confused. People pointing upward, clutching their phones, crying out in disbelief as if the sky itself had opened. And maybe it had. Within hours the world was on edge. Not panicking, not yet, but terrified. Governments issued statements full of calm lies. No threat. Still a comet. Unusual but harmless. But the people who watched the sky knew better. They felt the danger in their bones. And then came December 10th, the night the object spoke, if speaking is the right word for what happened. At 0214 UTC, every radio telescope in the network received the same signal. A pulse. Not radar, not an echo, an emission. A low-frequency vibration that repeated every 10.96 seconds, matching the countdown perfectly. It wasn't random noise. It wasn't interference. It was structured. A wave with harmonics so precise it felt engineered. It traveled through space like a heartbeat. And when the computers converted it into audio, the sound froze us where we stood. A low rumble, a rising tone, then a sharp drop, then a swell like something inhaling, listening. The director slammed the speaker off, but we had all heard it. Something in that signal made the hair on my arm stand upright. It felt wrong, not evil, not threatening, just wrong in a way that told us we were no longer observers. We were being acknowledged. And if Phase 3 was expansion, then Phase 4 was awakening. The next days blurred, the drift increased, the distance shrank. 380,000 kilometers, inside lunar orbit now. 370,000, 360,000. 3II TAS was moving with purpose. Every time the countdown pulse flashed through our instruments, the object brightened slightly, a blue shiver rippling through the violet like electricity running through muscle. Whatever it was building toward, it required proximity. It required Earth. On the evening of December 17th, 2 days before the predicted transformation, the largest anomaly yet occurred. The object stopped drifting, stopped accelerating, stopped behaving like anything with physical mass. It held still. Not in orbit, not in motion. Still. As if waiting. Why did it stop? Someone asked. Nobody answered. Because the realization landed in all of us at once. It had reached the distance it needed. Phase 4 would begin here, at 350,000 kilometers from Earth. The moon watched from beneath it, like a witness to the execution of a prophecy. And then, at 0322 UTC on December 18th, 1 day before the final phase, the object dimmed. Completely. The glow, the pulses, the harmonics, gone. People around the world looked up and saw nothing but a starless patch of sky where the object should have been. Telescopes caught only a void. Radar waves passed through the coordinates as if the space was empty. But the gravitational readings, they spiked. Something was there. Something massive. Something silent. The final calm before the storm. "This isn't disappearance," Adriana whispered, staring at the fading telemetry. "It's dormancy. It's holding its final phase until the exact moment." Tomorrow. December 19th. The day that had been printed on our charts for months. The day that the countdown had been racing toward with unnatural precision. And as I stared at the empty patch of dead sky, at the nothingness that seemed to pulse,
December 19th began like the world was pretending nothing was about to happen. Morning traffic, coffee shops, news anchors smiling too wide, reading lines no one believed anymore. But anyone who'd looked at the night sky the evening before knew something was different. The object wasn't visible anymore, not glowing, not pulsing, not shimmering. It was simply gone. Not gone in distance, gone in presence. A hole, a wound in the sky. Every telescope pointed toward it found the same thing. A perfectly circular region where stars seemed slightly warped, slightly displaced, like looking at the night through a lens that shouldn't exist. There was no light, no radar return, no signal, no heat, nothing. And yet the gravitational instruments insisted it was still there, still massive, still waiting. I arrived at the control room before sunrise. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Technicians whispered instead of speaking. Screens glowed with numbers that refused to settle. Every agency on Earth was watching the same patch of sky. And the countdown pulse, still detectable in low-frequency gravitational waves, was now at 9.01 seconds. 9 seconds. When this began, it was 11.4. Now the pulses came like a heartbeat pounding through the fabric of space itself. "It will start today," the director said quietly as he entered the room. Phase 5. No one corrected him. No one argued. We all felt it, the sense that something immense was stretching beneath the surface of reality, like a creature turning in sleep before opening its eyes. At 11:32 UTC, the first anomaly appeared. A flicker, a ripple, as if someone had tugged on the sky. The starless patch twisted just slightly, like a liquid surface disturbed by a fingertip. Then another ripple, then another. The gravitational readings surged. The void brightened, not with light, but with definition. Something inside the darkness began to outline itself. It started faint, a soft skeleton of light tracing impossible angles, like the first sketch of a shape older than memory. The room fell silent as the silhouette sharpened, edges glowing faintly violet. And for the first time since it arrived, we saw the true form of 3IATLS. It wasn't a sphere. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't anything that belonged to matter as we understand it. It was geometry made physical. An interlocking lattice of angular planes, hexagonal arcs, nested structures shifting and rotating with mechanical precision, like a cosmic iris, like a device waking from dormancy. The violet glow pulsed, matching the countdown. 9 seconds, 8.9, 8.87. And then the first sound reached us, not through speakers, not through air, but through the building itself. A low hum, vibrating the floor, the walls, the bones in our bodies. It felt like the planet itself was reacting. The director grabbed the console. "Is that seismic?" "No," Adriana whispered. "It's resonance." The object was emitting a frequency that Earth responded to, a gravitational tone, a pressure on space-time. And as the seconds shrank, the hum grew stronger. People outside the observatory began to feel it too. Videos appeared online, objects rattling on shelves, water rippling in glasses, pets howling, babies crying. Not from sound, but from something deeper, something instinctual, something telling every living thing on Earth that this was not a comet, not a visitor, but an event. At 11:39, the object brightened again. The violet light shifted blue, then white, then something we didn't have a name for, something beyond the spectrum, something the sensors registered as non-classifiable photonic activity. And then the countdown reached 8 seconds. 8. And everything changed. The object unfolded, not physically in the way a machine would, but dimensionally, like parts of it rotated out of reality and back again. Shapes appeared where there should be nothing, angles that shouldn't exist, light bent around corners that space shouldn't have. And then an opening formed. Not a door, not a hatch, a hollow within the void. A hollow that swallowed starlight and returned something else entirely. A beam. Not destructive, not bright. A thin column of white so pure that it looked like absence rather than illumination. It extended outward slowly, gracefully, pointed not at Earth, but past it, toward the empty darkness beyond our orbit. "What is it doing?" someone breathed. No one answered. The beam pulsed. 8 seconds,
7.9, 7.8. And in that moment, as the beam intensified, the truth struck me like a cold hand closing around my spine. The beam wasn't a weapon. It wasn't communication. It was scanning, searching, locating. But not us, not Earth, the space behind us. The region of the solar system where 3I, 2I, ATLS had vanished months earlier. Phase 3 of that earlier object ended with fragmentation, with a burst of energy no one could explain. But what if it wasn't destruction? What if it was a marker, a beacon, and 3IATLS was following it? "They're not arrivals," I whispered. "They're instructions." The beam intensified. The object pulsed again. 7 seconds, 6.9, 6.89. The hum deepened into a vibrating growl that shook dust from the ceiling tiles. And then Earth responded. No poetic exaggeration, no metaphor. The magnetosphere rippled, the ionosphere glowed faintly blue, storms flickered across the poles like stuttering circuitry. The entire planet was reacting to the frequency the object emitted, like a tuning fork waking something dormant, something beneath us. "Look at the ground sensors," someone yelled. The readings were impossible. Electromagnetic spikes originating not from the sky, but from Earth's crust, from deep beneath the mantle, from regions no instrument had ever detected activity in. It wasn't coming from the object. It was being echoed, reflected, matched, like Earth was answering the call. And in that moment, in that rising vibration that made the air feel thick and the ground feel thin, I understood what the phases meant. Not transformation, not weaponization, synchronization. 3IATLS wasn't evolving, it was syncing with Earth, preparing the system, aligning frequencies, calibrating, and the countdown wasn't to activation of the object, it was to activation of whatever it was contacting here. The next pulses came faster now. 6 seconds, 5.9, 5.8. The beam flickered, the geometric structure shuddered, the void brightened. Something was coming, something inevitable. "Shut it down!" someone screamed, though there was nothing to shut down. "Stop it!" But the director whispered the truth. We were never in control. The beam snapped brighter, so bright it cast shadows beneath the desks, so bright that it felt like a second sun was forming without heat. And then something answered. A pulse, a shock wave, faint but undeniable. It didn't come from the object, it came from Earth, deep, deep beneath the crust, a matching harmonic, rising upward like a giant stirring under stone. The instrument spiked. The screens flickered. The hum became a scream without sound. 4 seconds, 3.9, 3.8. And the geometric arcs on the object rotated in unison, aligning like petals around a core. And the beam struck some invisible threshold, stopped, and expanded outward in a sphere of white. It didn't explode. It blossomed, a quiet